The question many Catholics are asking today feels heavier than ever. Is the Latin Mass about to be abolished forever? Across the world, faithful Catholics who grew up with the beauty and reverence of the ancient liturgy are now watching events unfold in the Vatican with a mixture of sorrow, confusion, and disbelief. Something sacred that connected generations for centuries seems to be slowly pushed toward disappearance. The tension is not about language alone. It is about faith, memory, and the sense of belonging that many Catholics have found in the traditional Latin Mass. In recent weeks, reports have circulated that while a special prayer room for Muslims is being opened in the Vatican, the old Latin Mass, the very rite that nourished countless saints, is being restricted even further. For many believers, this contrast feels painful. They ask how it is possible that the Church, which once guarded its ancient treasures with such devotion, now seems ready to set them aside in the name of uniformity. The story has gained attention worldwide, especially after journalist Raymond Araujo devoted a large portion of his EWTN broadcast to the issue on October 16th. His tone was calm, yet direct, reflecting the uneasiness now spreading through Catholic communities. The discussion focused on how bishops in the United States have been responding to the directives that followed Traditionis Custodes, the motu proprio issued from Rome to regulate the celebration of the old rite. After that document was published, bishops across the United States began taking action. Some moved quickly, issuing letters that limited or even stopped the celebration of the Latin Mass in diocesan parishes. Others hesitated, fearing division but also wanting to remain obedient to papal authority. The result has been a patchwork of restrictions, some dioceses where the old Mass continues quietly, and others where families who attended it for years suddenly find themselves without a place to go. The scenes are similar everywhere. A parish once full of young families kneeling in silence before the altar suddenly receives a notice. The traditional Mass will no longer be offered here. Priests who loved celebrating the ancient liturgy are told to stop. Communities that spent years growing around that form of worship must disperse. The faithful who once traveled every Sunday for that reverent experience now gather in living rooms to pray and wonder what to do next.
The feeling as a kind of spiritual exile. They are not rebelling against the Church. They are longing for the liturgy that once shaped their understanding of holiness. They see beauty, order, and reverence in the Latin Mass, and for them its disappearance feels like losing a part of their identity. Observers inside and outside the Church have noted that Traditionis Custodes seemed less about guidance and more about control. Its tone, they say, was administrative rather than pastoral. Instead of encouraging unity through dialogue, it seemed to impose obedience through bureaucracy. As one commentator put it, the document was made more to regulate than to reconcile. At the moment, around 15 U.S. dioceses have fully implemented the restrictions, but reports suggest that pressure from Rome is increasing. The Vatican is said to be urging bishops to apply the rules uniformly. Even those bishops who quietly sympathized with the traditional faithful are finding it hard to resist. Some comply reluctantly to avoid conflict. Others embrace the directive wholeheartedly, using it as an opportunity to end what they see as parallel communities. Yet, despite the closures and confusion, the faithful attached to the old rite have not given up. Across the United States, from Dallas to Philadelphia, from Los Angeles to Chicago, groups of Catholics are gathering to pray and organize. They hold rosaries outside closed churches, write respectful letters to their bishops, and remind each other that faith is never lost when it is lived with humility and perseverance. For them, this movement is not nostalgia. It is about belonging. Many of these people were not even alive before the Second Vatican Council. They discovered the Latin Mass through curiosity and fell in love with its sacred silence, its chant, its sense of mystery. In a world filled with noise and distraction, the stillness of that liturgy speaks to their hearts. This growing sense of belonging has created what some call a liturgy people, a community united not by protest, but by prayer. They are families with small children, young adults, converts, and lifelong
Catholics. They are not asking for special treatment, only to keep what has always been part of the Church's heritage. At the center of the current storm stands Cardinal Arthur Roche, the prefect of the Dicastery for Divine Worship. He is the man responsible for ensuring that the papal directives are carried out in every diocese. Known for his firm loyalty to the current papal line, he has continued to remind bishops that the reforms of the Second Vatican Council are irreversible. These words, often repeated, have become something like an administrative creed, a statement that leaves little room for discussion or diversity. Interestingly, even though Cardinal Roche is past the usual retirement age for Vatican officials, the Pope personally extended his mandate. Many interpret this as a clear sign of trust and continuity, a message that the policy of restriction toward the old rite will continue without pause. For those who hoped for reconciliation, that decision felt like a door closing. Early in his pontificate, Pope Leo XIV, as the article called him, had offered words that many traditional Catholics found encouraging. He spoke about unity and understanding, and some imagined he might grant greater freedom for the traditional liturgy. But as time passed, those hopes began to fade. In a recent interview, the Pope commented that if the Eucharist is celebrated in Latin with incense and traditional ornaments, that should be enough for those who love the Old Mass. Raymond Arroyo, during his program, reflected on that statement and noted that it sounded more like a minimal concession than a true gesture of openness. To many, it felt as if the Pope was saying, "You can keep a few symbols, but not the substance." This is where the pain deepens. For the faithful, the issue is not incense or language. It is the entire experience of standing before God in reverence. They feel that the old liturgy protects something profound, the sense that Mass is primarily a sacrifice, not a social gathering. They believe that when that sense of sacred awe fades, faith itself becomes fragile. The Pope has also said in another interview that the Mass can still be celebrated in Latin as long as it is the Reformed version that came after the Second Vatican Council. On the surface, those words seem
open and generous, but soon after he added a remark that changed the tone completely. Between the Tridentine Mass and that of the Council, I really don't know where we'll end up. It's a complicated issue. To some, that sounded like confusion. To others, detachment. They wondered whether tradition could truly be preserved by someone who saw it mainly as a complication rather than a treasure. And when Cardinal Roche's position was extended, it confirmed what many had already feared, that the Vatican's direction was fixed on a single path. One form of liturgy for the entire Church, one reformed rite, one expression. For Catholics attached to the traditional Mass, this feels like being told that their devotion no longer fits in the modern Church. It's not just a regulation, it's an emotional and spiritual wound. During his broadcast, Raymond Arroyo dared to voice the question that many were afraid to ask. If a Catholic loves the old Mass, does that mean he breaks unity with the Pope? The studio went silent. It was a moment heavy with meaning. Arroyo let the words hang, then calmly asked, "Is everything a pope says right simply because he says it?" He was not attacking the papacy. He was pointing to a deeper truth, that unity cannot be built on mere obedience without understanding. To love tradition does not mean to disobey. To seek continuity does not mean to reject authority. The tension lies in how fidelity is understood and lived. That question resonated deeply with the audience. Many felt relieved to hear someone articulate what they had been silently struggling with. They love the Church, they respect the Pope, but they cannot accept that loving the ancient liturgy makes them second-class Catholics. Arroyo's statement reminded viewers that unity imposed by force is not true unity. Real communion must grow from shared faith, not fear. And when personal preferences of leadership are treated as dogma, confusion spreads among the faithful. At that moment, the debate moved beyond rubrics and rules. It became a question of conscience. How to remain faithful both to the Church and to what one believes the Church has always been. The faithful who attend the traditional Mass see themselves as guardians, not rebels. They do not wish to divide, but to preserve. They want to keep alive what countless generations of Catholics have handed down: the language, the gestures, the silence that carries mystery. They want their children to experience the same reverence their ancestors knew. And so, even as churches close their doors to the old rite, prayer groups grow. Rosaries are said for bishops, novenas are offered for understanding, and pilgrimages are organized in reparation and hope. It is not a movement of anger, it is a movement of love. A royal closed his program with a thought that still echoes today. He asked, "If the Vatican can open a prayer room for Muslims inside its own walls, why can't Catholics attached to the ancient rite have a place to celebrate their Mass?" The question was rhetorical, but it exposed a painful contradiction. Openness to others seems limitless, but openness to one's own children feels narrow. For many faithful, that single question sums up the crisis. They see a church eager to dialogue with the world, yet hesitant to dialogue with its own tradition. They ask themselves how inclusion can be preached, while exclusion is practiced within. The debate over the Latin Mass is not just about liturgy, it is about identity, continuity, and the heart of what it means to be Catholic in a time of change. The question that now echoes through churches and homes is simple, yet painful. Why does it seem like the Church no longer has room for its own tradition? For centuries, the Latin Mass united Catholics across languages, nations, and generations. It was the same Mass prayed by saints, whispered by martyrs, sung in monasteries, and celebrated in every corner of the world. Its rhythm, its prayers, its gestures, everything was built around the idea that worship is about God first, not us. When you entered a church where the Latin Mass was celebrated, you stepped into something timeless. The priest faced the altar, leading the people toward God, not toward himself. The silence was deep, filled with meaning. Every bow, every word, every moment had purpose. It wasn't entertainment, it was adoration. For many Catholics today, that sacred atmosphere is something the modern liturgy, however sincere, often struggles to create. Yet now, that ancient treasure seems to be treated almost like a threat. What changed? The Second Vatican Council in the 1960s introduced many reforms to make the liturgy more accessible, and for many people those changes brought new life. The Mass could be heard in local languages, music became simpler, and lay people could participate more visibly. Those were good intentions. But over the decades, the pendulum swung so far that what was once universal and sacred began to fade from memory. Now, with the restrictions being enforced by the Vatican, many Catholics feel like that final thread connecting them to their spiritual ancestors is being cut. The Latin Mass is not being officially abolished, but the way things are moving, it's being squeezed to the edge until it quietly disappears. Some say this is being done to protect unity. But unity in the Church has never meant uniformity. For centuries, the Church has allowed different rites and traditions to coexist. The Dominican rite, the Ambrosian rite, the Mozarabic rite, all of these still exist because the Church understood that unity comes from faith, not sameness. So why should the Tridentine Mass, which was the standard for so long, now be treated as a problem? It's a question many priests are asking quietly. They are told to obey, and they do. But in private conversations, some confess that they don't understand why the faithful, who simply love the old liturgy, are being made to feel like they are disobedient or divisive. One priest said, "I've celebrated both forms. I've seen the same love of Christ in both. Why can't we have both in peace?" The faithful echo that sentiment. They don't reject the new